pals. Welcome to Page vs. Screen, where I take a look at stories that have been adapted from the written word to the silver and small screens to see if anything on the screen can be better than what was on the page. Today we're entering the Looking Glass to join Alice on her adventures through Wonderland, as written by Lewis Carroll. The format is simple. I tell you about what the film versions did great and what made me go curiouser and curiouser. I look at how accurate it is, if any changes made sense, and how entertaining I found it to determine which did it better, the page or the screen. Now, most people have probably heard of Alice and something about a strange grinning cat or her having tea with a strange man wearing a hat. But for those that don't know much beyond that, or those that have wandered into the forest of forgetting, here is as much of both Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass that I can fit into the 3-minute download. Little Alice is chilling with her sister when she sees a white rabbit in a waistcoat fretfully checking his pocket watch. Intrigued, she follows him and falls down a deep rabbit hole and lands in a dark hall with a lot of doors. In exploring the hall, she finds a door with a beautiful garden that she really wants to check out, but there's a catch. She grows and shrinks from eating and using various things that she comes across and cries a lake when exceptionally tall. Going through this lake, she meets various animals that she offends by talking about her cat's hunting prowess of small animals, dissing their height, and growing so big that she fills the house, scaring them half to death. Even though she offends a blue caterpillar, he still tells her that the mushroom he had been sitting on will allow her to shrink and grow, depending on which pieces she eats. She finally hits the height she wants, saving pieces for later, but then sees a small house and shrinks down again just to check that out. There she meets a strange duchess with a baby, a pepper-happy cook, and a cat with a grin. This Cheshire Cat eventually gives her directions to the March Hares, where a tea party is happening with his friends the Mad Hatter and a very sleepy Dormouse. She finds them rude and moves on because she still wants to check out that garden. But, she hasn't gotten there yet. Eventually, she gets there. There are some cards painting roses in the hopes that their queen will spare them. Alice ends up getting invited to an odd, very unorganized croquet match, and the Queen of Hearts is constantly calling for people's heads to be cut off. The Queen directs her to the Griffin and Mock Turtle for some wisdom, which they do drop, but a trial interrupts their conversation. It turns out
the Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts.
But by Alice's reckoning, it's a ridiculous trial between the witnesses and general procedure of the King and Queen of Hearts. The Queen is angered by this, and the cards of the court attack Alice, who wakes up from a dream. Later, Alice is in her house with her cats. She muses about the house on the other side of the Looking Glass and goes through a portal to the Looking Glass house. She comes across living chess pieces in the room who think she's a volcano. She arrives in the garden with talking flowers and meets the Red Queen. Alice wants to become a queen herself, and the Red Queen lets her know that it's possible if she makes it across a chessboard terrain in 8 moves. She jumps into things and is on a train with odd passengers, then jumps into the Forest of Forgetting and meets her favorite Tweedles, who like poetry about a certain walrus and carpenter and fighting over broken rattles. She's startled at one point by a loud rumbling, and Tweedle Squared tells her that the Red King is dreaming about all of them all the time. The White Queen shows up remembering things backwards and then becomes a sheep who sells her an egg. That egg turns into the familiar Humpty Dumpty on a wall. He enjoys a good on birthday and working words to their max. He falls off the wall and the White King's horses and men rush to help him, leaving the White King behind. One of his messengers informs him that the Lion and Unicorn are fighting over his crown again, and they go off to check things out. Alice is made to serve them plum cake, and she runs off into the path of the Red Knight. The White Knight comes and saves her. His clumsy ass shows her all of his inventions, while he escorts her through the last stretch before she becomes queen in her own right. The Red and White Queens quiz her and then invite her to her own feast. At said feast, things get a PG version of Bacchanalian, and then she wakes up shaking one of her cats. She muses about whether she dreamed it up or if the Red King did, and leaves that open for the reader to decide. You might be asking why I did both books. Well, one of the most well-known adaptations in this area of the world is probably the Disney version from the 50s, and it combines story elements from both Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, and it was by no means the first or last to do this. The first one that did this that I'm aware of was made back in 1915. So not all did, some stuck with just Wonderland and some went with just Looking Glass, but weeding all that out would have been more trouble than a Bandersnatch on a rampage, so both it is. From what I could find listed, there were over 50 adaptations and things inspired by all things Wonderland. I was able to find 31, but no worries, I'm not talking about all of them in this video. After watching all of them, I decided I would eventually discuss them all, but today I'm going on with some ranty goodness and joining in with the Queen's cries of
Oh, for this head!
With the worst and not as great adaptations of them all. I watched them, so you don't have to. You're welcome. With all of these, side note, the book is far better than the movie or show that I watched. The first one of the day is the worst of the worst. In last, we have the 1987 Aussie adaptation of Through the Looking Glass. Where to begin? Well, it's an animated musical. Cool, okay. But the person who does Alice was off-key, and then there were parts where there was rhythmic speaking, and it didn't fit with the style of music, and, like, ugh. They could have taken a page out of Disney's book and had a different person singing rather than who does the regular dialogue that was better than them, but they didn't, and it was distracting, and I hated it. Then there was this random guy, Tom the Jester. He was also some sort of wizard because he could do magic, and he was supposed to be protecting the borders of the White Queen's territory. Why is the court jester in charge of this? I do not know. Also, once Alice is on her way, he takes her through the first square, because the main stuff in Looking Glass references chess, all about the chess, and he tells her that he can't help her in the second square, and pretty much in the next breath, not even, he says he'll guide her through square 2. No pleading from her for some help, just continuous stream of thought type thing, It's just, I can't help you. I'm going to help you. And there was no, like, you know what, I've changed my mind or anything like that. It's just, I can't help you. Through this square, I'm going to help you. What the hell? And the White Queen and Red Queen were disappointing. I mean, at least the Red Queen wore red, though, because this was the White Queen. The reason why they're called the Red and White Queens is because those are the colors they wear, because they're fucking chess pieces. It'd be like having the Queen of Hearts be shown as any other card suit. And apparently, the Red Queen is a villain. Like, okay, she's a little snippy in the book, during the feast she won't let Alice eat any of the dishes that she's been introduced to and sends them away, which kind of annoys Alice. But she's not a villain. They pull a complete Hades on her and make her evil when, like Hades does with Heracles in Greek myth, she helps Alice and tells her how to become a queen herself, and gives a stamp of approval on it with the White Queen. The book has no real villain, and it works so well, because not every adventure has or needs a villain. Challenges and paths to take and work through, yes, but not every story has a, traditional adversary. And also, the White Queen says that she can become the PM if she wins the game by getting to the Red Queen's castle. She wants to be a motherfucking queen, not the PM. A queen. Why the downgrade? Why? And while there is a unicorn that fights a lion in the story of Looking Glass, this is a little different. They do have unicorns as centaurs, right? Okay? But they ride them through. They ride them through the second square, and then Pegasus shows up. This veers so far from things in the book. I mean, okay, yeah, the shell is there. She's working across the countryside squares to level up, and there are characters like the White Knight and Humpty Dumpty there. And also, Humpty Dumpty is a dino egg. And, okay, yeah, that is one of the least egregious things done in this entire movie. But, it makes no sense because the White Queen goes, oh, yeah, Humpty Dumpty, it's gonna be a real struggle to deal with. He's one of the Red Queen's minions. But he helps her. He's a really sweet guy. And he helps her out. There is no consistency, and it's only got the tiniest nugget of accuracy. And it's supposed to be an adaptation. There are movies that are very loose adaptations that are way better than this, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, it's just... And it wasn't very entertaining. I literally paused and took a nap partway through. And, I'm not even kidding. I took a nap before continuing on with it. I don't know. Maybe if I were a kid and had never read the book, I would have enjoyed it more, but, it's so bad. Do not watch this. And I will be fair to some of these adaptations. Some of the items on the list aren't my style of cinema, and that's part of why I didn't enjoy them as much. And so I might say, oh, if X style is your orange marmalade, then cool. Check it out. You might actually enjoy it. But this one, just no. Save yourself the hour and 15 minutes that you'll never get back, and do not do it. It is just that bad. In equal 29th place, we have 1973's That Girl and 1966's Alice in Wonderland in Paris. For the 73 one, there was apparently some show back in the day called That Girl, and this was some sort of animated special for it. In fact, it was the Saturday Superstar movie one day in 73, but it has barely anything from Wonderland in it. The premise was Anne-Marie, the main character. She flukes into a job as an editor for a publishing house, and she has to come up with the newest kids' book for the season, and so we dive in and out of multiple fairy tales where she and the people in her life take the places of the characters of the story. I mean, they include the Hall of Doors and the Tea Party, and the publishing house is called Wonder Books, but aside from that, there's no real link to actual Alice in Wonderland. The highlight of the whole thing is the commercials from the original airing were somehow included, and there were a lot of cereal ads. And yes, it was the original commercials, because some of them actually had, like, the copyright 1973 on the screen, so that's how I know that those were actually the original commercials. And, like, I guess it was okay for something that was inspired, at least in part, by the Alice stories, and it was somewhat entertaining, but since it pretty much had nothing really to do with the source, despite the name of the special, it's an equal 29th with the 1966 Alice in Wonderland in Paris. But I don't really understand why this was counted with any form of adaptation. Like, there's Alice, she goes to Paris to meet Madeline, with a mouse that tastes cheese. And like with That Girl, it shows different fairy tales, but no real Wonderland tales. I mean, yeah, okay, she gets shrunk by some cheese infused with mushrooms that Françoise, the mouse, not even kidding about the name, has on him. And there is a mention of the rabbit hole, and the opening credits says toys of characters from the books, like the Tweedles and whatnot. And at the end, Madeline is carrying a copy of Alice in Wonderland. That's it. Again, like That Girl, it was somewhat entertaining, but it has nothing to do with the books. Like, it just, it could have been better, but it's one of the lowest ranked. And calling either of these inspired by is a bit of a stretch, but they're included on the list, so I'll include them here. Yet they still ranked higher than what's supposed to be proper adaptations, so, you know. In 28th place, we have Funky Alice from 1991. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but this one might originally be from Japan. There's an adaptation from the same year called Sugar and Spice, Alice in Wonderland, and when I searched for that, this is what came up. So it might be my first international not originally in English adaptation, but maybe not. Whenever the non-English ones come up, I get excited, because I like to see how other cultures show the stories that we know and love in the English-speaking world. But regardless, the version of Funky Alice I found, if originally from Japan, has been dubbed into English, and is from a series of various stories that were turned into, funky insert story here. This one, unfortunately, failed to impress overall. It did hit some of the major events of Wonderland, she follows White Rabbit down the rabbit hole, ends up in the Hall of Doors, is in the White Rabbit's house, chats with the caterpillar, the Duchess, has the tea party, is in the garden with the croquet match, and there's the trial at the end. But this is something clearly for kids, and there were a couple of lines in the Hall of Doors scene that made me go, seriously? Because, true to form, she can't fit through the door. And she says,
I don't suppose a crash diet's going to be much help.
And then this.
Oh, great. Now I'm supposed to stuff myself so I'll be short and fat?
Now, I know I've forgotten about a lot of stuff that I would have watched in my early childhood, which is when this came out. But I can't remember anything that blatant that's specifically for kids said by a child character about dieting. At least not off the top of my head. I was sitting there thinking, they put this in a kid's show? The fuck? Like, no wonder so many people have had body issues from such a young age, They also made the cards into what seemed like Elvis impersonators, and at the trial, the Duchess is a witness when it was the pepper cook originally, These changes didn't make sense, but they didn't not make sense either. They were just minor things overall and didn't really hurt anything. It was just weird random details to futz with. As far as accuracy to the general plot goes, it's okay. But because of the horrible messaging with dieting comments for kids, this gets low scores. on the entertainment side. Low scores. I mean, there was the occasional chuckle, but otherwise, nope. And that really dragged it down, and that's why it's so low. 27th place brings us to the 1988 adaptation from Australia. Apparently, I'm not a huge fan of the Aussie productions. This one is moderately accurate. It hits a lot of the common overarching things, like the Tea Party, Caterpillar Duchess, just name a few. But when she first sees the garden, there's this crazy race, and a snail wins. And, okay, yay, snail, like, kudos. But it was just weird. Like, in the book, she sees this lovely garden that she wants to check out. And I guess they felt they had to spice things up or something, make it more exciting. I don't know. It didn't hurt things, but at the same time, it was just weird, and it did lessen my enjoyment of it. And then in the book, when you meet the Duchess, she's holding a baby that she later hands off to Alice. And when Alice gets away from the flying plates being thrown by the pepper cook, it turns into a pig. Here, it's just already a pig. I mean, why? I didn't like that. The transformation was actually kind of a fun little bit, so why exclude that? But the absolute worst thing about this adaptation were the Cheshire Cat and the Dodo. Cheshire Cat, he was just creepy. And Dodo was annoying as fuck. In the book, he's respected by people. And while he has a weird sense of logic, it's not like he's a complete bumbling fool. And in this, Dodo is all like, why are you changing his base character? You've included his actual scene, and then you do this to him? Why? And then you insert Dodo into scenes where he was never included in the first place. So you've taken an annoying character and forced him onto us more than required. He takes Alice to the garden after the tea party, and then to the mock turtle. I mean, why cut out the griffin and the second Hall of Doors scene? The Hall of Doors was already designed, and she could easily be put into that again. And the griffin wasn't annoying in the book. So why replace him with a character that you've made annoying as all fuck? Australia? What are you doing? Okay? It's been a long time since you were a prison colony. Why are you committing these crimes against animation? Why? But aside from the creepy Cheshire and the dummy Dodo, the movie was mildly entertaining, and it was moderately accurate. But Dodo was annoying enough that it just plummeted it down the ranks. So now we come to the first one, where it's actually for sure from a different non-English speaking country. I'm not sure of the year it came out, but it's a Dutch version. I found a couple of episodes from a series based on Wonderland. In the first episode, she buys a top hat that used to belong to a magician, and in it, there was a white rabbit, and I thought this was the white rabbit, because that would have been a fun little intro for him, you know? But nope. No. It's a random rabbit, because the actual white rabbit shows up later. I don't understand why this random rabbit exists, and he was brought into the show. He annoyed me. Maybe not as much as Aussie's Dodo, but he was annoying and useless. Brought nothing to the story of what I saw. They kept a couple things, like when she falls down the rabbit hole, she comes across some marmalade. Things make her shrink and grow, but these things didn't seem to affect the random rabbit for some reason. And, you know, they had singing flowers. And the Queen of Hearts. The Queen of Hearts, just doesn't like Alice on sight. Freaks out the 2 times that they see each other. No conversation, no reason for why, it's just she sees her and she's like, ah! What the fuck? I mean, yeah, the Queen of Hearts does call for Alice's head in the book. But they aren't, always at odds. They, have some nice moments. But in this, just the second she sees her, the yelling and freaking out starts. There was one bit that did give me a little bit of a chuckle. In the second episode, she ends up in the Hall of Doors while chasing the White Rabbit, and there's like this little homage to Scooby-Doo, go through one door, go through another, she's chasing the rabbit, rabbit's chasing her, crisscross, all that stuff. So it's kind of like an homage to Scooby-Doo, even though it probably wasn't, but it felt like that to me. So this one was meh on the accuracy front, and while the structure of the books allows for some jumbling, there was a lot that was messed with, and it just didn't make sense to me, and I only found it a little entertaining. I'm assuming if I understood what was being said outside of, like, the shared words between Dutch and English, it would have been more enjoyable. I did feel that I got most of it, though, because the visual aspect of things, if it were a radio play or a podcast, I would be fucked. But the visuals portrayed enough for me to be able to follow what was going on, so I will give it that. But there were many, many other adaptations that were done better, and so it's in 26th place overall. Number 25 comes to us from France with, and while I have practiced pronunciation, I apologize if I muck it up, with Alice ou la Dernière from 1977. To say it was loosely based on Wonderland is an understatement, because outside of the lead being named Alice, and her being in a weird place, there's not really much more that links the book to the movie, but apparently Wonderland was the inspiration for it. The version I found did have subtitles, but those subtitles were in Spanish, so I know random things in French and random things in Spanish. I am by no means fluent and mainly relied on visuals, going, I understood that, when I understood something said or on the subs, which wasn't very often. But from what I could tell, it basically boils down that Alice leaves an unhappy marriage or relationship, and as she's driving through a storm, the windshield of her car breaks, and she ends up walking down this path to the nearest house. It's a fancy house, with a light on. And it gave me massive Rocky Horror Picture Show vibes, to the point that I had "There's a light" stuck in my head for the rest of the night. Side note, Rocky Horror Picture Show came out a couple of years before this movie. I don't know if it influenced anything for Monsieur Chabrol, but that's where my brain went. Anyway, she's welcomed by Henri, who is the owner, and his butler, and the next morning, nobody else is really around, and the local plant life is growing into the house, but yet things are being taken care of, and she can't find a way off the property for most of the movie. Eventually she does see other people and get off the property, and yeah. I'm not sure if it's a nod to Wonderland, but the first person she sees after that first night is a man wearing white. Could be a nod to the White Rabbit, maybe not. And there was a lot of focus put on the clock in the room she was staying in, and throughout both books, various timepieces do show up, so it could be, might not be, I don't know. Throughout the movie, I was also questioning if this was all just a dream, or if she crashed her car after leaving her home, and that's what the windshield cracking was, and so she's either unconscious or dead now. But because it had me questioning these types of things, it kind of felt like the end of Looking Glass, where the question of, is this the Red King's dream, or is it reality, or whatever, when that came up, right? And I'm probably grasping at straws trying to find where the inspiration from Wonderland comes into play, if it does at all. But since I didn't understand either language, I really only had the visuals, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm going with, and I do know that it was inspired by Carol's Alice in Wonderland stories, so that's that's the connection I found. In the end, it turns out I was right, and she had crashed her car. I'm assuming she died, and the house was the afterlife, but there was a cyclist that stops, and maybe they get her help, and it was just in the nick of time, but based on her pose, I really don't think she survived. But there's that question again of maybe, so I don't know. The whole thing was kind of intriguing, at times a little disturbing, and so it was actually entertaining on some level, even with the language barrier. Oddly, it was better than some full-on proper adaptations of the stories, which is why it's ranked where it is, even though the links to the source material are tenuous at best. It was the first of the live-action musical miniseries. When I did the search, this was the only one that came up, so I left it at that. The episode ends just before Alice comes across White Rabbit, and he sends her to his house for his gloves and fan. Don't really have a lot to say about this one. It hits all the things from the beginning of Wonderland to that point in the story, so it's really accurate. The most accurate of anything on this list so far, actually, and indeed any of the adaptations in this video, and most of the ones that will come in part 2. So you're probably wondering why it's in this video if it's so accurate. It was boring. It barely held my attention. I mean, yeah, it was better than some, but it was so wooden that it really hurt it. Like, I mean, great. You kept true to the story and kept a lot of the dialogue from the book, but why you gotta be so boring? Like, and you're a musical version. Musical versions supposed to hype it up, but nope. Like, I was almost wandering into nap territory again for this one. The only thing that elevated it to the ranks of 24th place was that it kept true to the story so well. If it had veered at all, it would have been down to the 1988 Aussie version. For number 23, we aptly go to 1923 and the Alice comedies produced by Walt Disney. Disney history, this is where Walt Disney worked before he started the famous Disney Studios. But as much as I love Disney, this one isn't that good. It's clearly better than some, but yeah. It's probably because I was expecting a proper precursor to the Disney's Alice movie from the 50s. So yeah, I did have some expectations when I watched that first episode, and it was the only one I watched. It was the only one that I found. I'm pretty sure if I tried harder I could find others. But aside from being called Alice's Wonderland, the main character being called Alice, and her traveling to another realm in the first one, it really had nothing to do with it. I mean, I did look at the other titles of the series, and that kind of solidified my opinion on it. However, it is in 23rd place, because first, it was fairly entertaining than a lot of the others that are inspired by it, and also, the tech that went into it is awesome. It is a live-action animation mix, kind of like, Disney's Mary Poppins. And this series is one of the first times he's playing with this type of style, if not the very first time. Back then, they didn't really have green screens like we do today and couldn't just use computer to overlay stuff like we would now, right? The fact that they figured out how to do this in the 20s, meld animation with live-action performance, is awesome! Fucking awesome! So it gets a big bump up for the nerdy me. If you want to check it out, this is one of the few in this video that may actually be worth the watch, as long as you don't go in expecting it to be a proper adaptation of the books, because, well, that's where it falls on its ass. The next one is a second N66 from that year to the complete overall list. Apparently, 66 was not the best vintage for Alice. The opening, creepy as fuck. I mean, the White Rabbit is actively trying to get her attention instead of just passing by and she notices him. And he's all beckoning like, "Come here, little girl." Like, oh. And there's no way she can know where he went because he's out of sight before she follows him. Like, I don't understand how she gets to the rabbit hole because she doesn't actually see him until the Hall of Doors. And, okay, yeah, it hits the big plot points and even some things that you don't see often, like after the caucus race that they do after everybody's wet. The animals expect Alice to give out prizes, and then she's given her own thimble from her own pocket as her prize. Weird, but that's Wonderland. But while Alice actually reacts to the world around her in the books, in this there's only 2 spots where any real emotion is shown. It's such a far cry from the actual character that it's disconcerting. And for some reason, nobody's an animal at all. Like, if you know the story already, you'll be able to identify who is who, but if you're not very familiar with it, you'll be wondering, who are you? Now, it does capture the oddity of Wonderland, sort of, but in an opposite kind of way. Because in the books, there was charm to most of the weirdness, not all, but most. But 99% of this was creepy, and also, if you hate ASMR, do not watch this. It has that, that close to the mic whisper for, like, all the dialogue. One quick note from editing me. So I was going through the video to find some clips, and I realized it wasn't as much of the movie as I thought it was. It had like that annoying whisper ASMR thing, but it was still enough. And yeah, so if you don't like ASMR, don't watch this movie. because it will bother you. But yeah. Anyways, back to our regularly scheduled programming. And then there was like scratching on the chalkboard and stuff like that. It was not a fun experience. It was actually painful for me to watch, and it didn't really entertain. However, despite all of this, it was pretty accurate, and it's in the 22 slot, not lower down. And that has actually a lot to do with the fact that this movie has more of a feel of one of those, what I would say is a weird art house style movie. It's not my cuppa at all. But acknowledging that, it's on brand for that style, and I think I can see where they were going, what they were trying to do. So even though I hated a lot about it, it's higher up for this part of the list for that reason. So if you like art house movies, you might actually enjoy it. There is technically one more entry for this section that I could find. So in 21st place, that's where we're at. But I'm gonna get into it more as part of my members content. The main reason basically being the TLDR summation. Alice on acid. Alice on fucking acid. It is super fucked up, but yet somehow weirdly accurate in its way. Like, yeah. So yeah, if you want to know more about this weird version of the Alice stories, and also to see other exclusive content, sign up as one of my members on Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description below. That's it for Alice this time. Part 2 will come later, promise. But in the meantime, join me for the next page versus screen, where a Christmas ghost takes me to check out some of the many, many, many versions of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Until next time, pals, blessed be.